composed of bodily fluids, data, and capital. I argue that rather than a pornographic media, camming might be better understood as a unique form of sex in its own right, a technosocial orgy where bodies work to pleasure themselves and others by way of prosthetic technologies and financial transactions. The essay is structured through an analysis of the different components of this architecture, such as the webcam, the platform design, and teledildonics, or sex toys that can be triggered remotely through tips. In particular, I analyze the decoration of Studio 20 sets, where the effect of the domestic is achieved through a reduced set of signifiers, such as a bed with only a fitted sheet and a framed inspirational poster, making it usable for different workers. I argue that in spite of its generic functionality, the appearance of a domestic space still proves valuable, creating a sense of intimacy by giving the work on display an aura of authenticity. Concurrently, the decorations contribute to the sexual capital of the worker within a field in which the domestic is associated with the erotic. In turn, I look at blog posts tailored to cammers without access to professional studios, which offer tips such as how to make lighting more flattering or how to match a color scheme to your skin tone, revealing how as much as decorating is designed around the body, it also designs the body and its appearance. In other words, decorating emerges as less a reflection of one's personality than a means to produce it and put it to use. In terms of primitive accumulation, the history of camming can be read through its progressive enclosure within the circuits of financial capitalism, from early amateur broadcast to the large corporate platforms that dominate today. It also speaks to the partial and particular incorporation of certain forms of sex work into mainstream economies more broadly, and even to the economization of masturbation. I attempt to trace the often opaque movements of value fracked from masturbating bodies as it passes through financial institutions, copyright courts, holding companies, and investment portfolios. Alongside this, I consider the economy of the cam workers, such as the gift economy built through Amazon wish lists that supplements their incomes, and the uncompensated effective labor integrated into their work. I identify both the significant advantages of camming over other forms of sex work, such as typically safer conditions, as well as the ways that it perpetuates structural inequalities that, in turn, have material repercussions, such as the trinary gender categorization, male, female, and trans, employed on major sites, to the sorting algorithms which have been shown to reinforce racialized erotic capital. The third essay, The Hermeneutics of the Home, or How Not to See the Other, examines promotional material for police and military training simulators from two private companies, as well as one from the United States Marine Corps. The first, a video from the YouTube channel of Vertra, features a video depicting the home of white supremacists, identifiable as such through Confederate and Nazi flags on the walls. The second is a looping video from the website of the mixed reality company Asterion VR, depicting presumably the home of a Latin American gang member, signaled as such through a Mexican luchador poster and the graphemes MA13 in a Gothic typeface on several walls, likely in reference to the Salvadorian MS-13 gang. Finally, the third is an article from Marine Times, a Marine Corps newspaper, that focuses in particular on a mixed reality training facility at Camp Pendleton, comprising a physical simulation of a Middle Eastern neighborhood populated with a mix of live actors and computer-generated videos projected on walls, alongside audio broadcasts of the call to prayer and pumped-in smells of rotten meat and sewage. Originally intended to resemble an Afghani village, as the locus of military conflict shifted, it was redesigned to appear as an Iraqi village, and later to simply evoke a generic third world feel, as one official is quoted as saying. Images of interior spaces show they are decorated with objects such as a rug and a hookah, which are again used to signify an identity, but one that's as generic and flat as the CGI inhabitants. Likewise, there are no cues in the decor that suggest danger or bad intentions. Here, decorating does not express identity, but otherness. In the essay, I again attempt to understand these simulators through the framework of primitive accumulation. The first is billed as a tool to condition officers to be more judicious with firearms, and is directly marketed in the context of increasing public scrutiny over the police shootings of Black Americans, both as a means to signal accountability, as well as to educate the community about the so-called realities of the job through public demonstration. This propagandistic aspect helps elucidate the decorating strategies at play. For one, alongside signifiers of white supremacy, the room features unfinished walls, dirty floors, and scattered cardboard boxes. As such, it suggests that racist ideology is a product of class, and that it is expressed through legible visual cues rather than concealed, insidious, or structural. The second video operates off a similar logic, deploying signifiers of a vague Latin American identity alongside dust and empty bottles to imply criminality. Unlike the first, there are no human figures depicted, suggesting that domestic appearances are enough to determine who deserves to be executed. In order to function, this logic assumes and produces the appearance of domesticity as something that exists apart from and prior to its enfrainment, while objects are perceived as somehow more impressionable, more capable of being affected and exhibiting affects, simply by being placed in a building that's been designated as a home. I argue that these two examples, with their presumption of a correlation between criminality and domestic appearance, can be read as an attempt to characterize it as something internal to the subject, and yet visually legible, therefore legitimating state violence. I attempt to situate these case studies within the context of what has been termed the neoliberal carceral state, or the concomitants of mass incarceration and neoliberalization, tethered to the racialized poverty produced by neoliberal economic reform and the privatization of the prison system in the United States. In fact, Marx's account of primitive accumulation understands incarceration as one of its primary mechanisms, and helps to illuminate its multiple overlapping purposes, from dispossession and surplus population absorption to the production of an enduring source of exploitable labor. At the same time, I endeavor to illustrate how, just as primitive accumulation is not consigned to the prehistory of capitalism, neither was chattel slavery, but rather, quite to the contrary, it was itself an invention of early capitalism that is continuously instrumentalized by it. That is, through the production of race and the deployment of racial marking, black lives in the United States are devalued and cheapened in the interests of capitalist accumulation, therefore linking together the primitive accumulation enabled by practices such as racialized subprime mortgage lending with that of the prison industrial complex. This analysis extends into my reading of the third simulator, although here decor does not act like a representation of a subject that can be read. Instead, decorating produces an atmosphere of prepackaged alterity that acts to obscure individuality rather than exhibit it. The simulator is intended to reprogram the soldier's interpretive relationship to certain domestic spaces so that they are associated instead with stress, combat, and death. But this relies on a similar racialized logic, as expressed by the quoted official, who elaborates that a Marine does not need to be exposed to the language specific to the region where they will be deployed, but simply a language that is not their own. In this, I locate the training simulator as a product of the ideology of American imperialist warfare, which functions as a mechanism of primitive accumulation through refashioning territories as sources of resource extraction rather than nation-states. I argue that this mode of warfare involves a dissolution of normative boundaries between combatant and civilian, as well as battlefield and domestic space, and therefore a soldier who, through a racialized logic, perceives not the presence of a subject, but rather their absence. That is, the military simulator reveals that the normative representations of decorating can be made useful not only in their application, but also in their refusal. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the book.